we need to change the economic model in some fundamental ways, and lots of people talk about some dimensions of it. For example, changing the world trade pattern and the conditionalities that are put on trade. These sorts of things are needed, but what nobody talks about, in my view, is the fundamental engine that drives the global economy. And the fundamental engine that drives the global economy is usury. Usury is, of course, a technical term, but it's very easy to understand. It simply means allowing people to use money, thus usury, to use money to make more money. So we could ask ourselves what is wrong with usury, and how come we use usury? The simple way of understanding this is to take the illustration that if you earned £100 or euros or whatever it is in a year, and you needed 90 actually to live on the year, you could of course save up the 10. And let's imagine that I, who need 90 to live for whatever reason, actually earn 80. I then need to look for 10 more from somewhere to survive. Well, you've got the 10 that you could loan me, and of course in the current system you could charge me a certain rate of interest, which is related to the market. And let's imagine that the market rate meant that you would loan it to me on the basis that I would return one extra pound to you at the end of the year, or yen or euro or rupee or whatever currency you want to use, renminbi or whatever. What happens at the end of a year? Well, at the end of a year, you, who were so rich that you could save up 10, now have one more than you needed. One more even than you'd saved up. Whereas I, who was so poor that I needed to borrow 10, am now £1 a yen or whatever, less better off, a pound worse off, or yen or whatever, worse off than I was to begin with. So you can see that this very simple mechanism of charging interest inevitably makes you richer and richer and richer and richer, provided you've got a little bit extra to start with, and inevitably makes me poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer, assuming that I'm at zero or near zero or minus something. So the system that is based on charging interest for the use of money inevitably ends up exacerbating social differences, economic differences to begin with. But it's exactly this engine which also drives the whole business of needing to grow the economy more and more. Because as long as I have to find a way of paying you interest back, then I need to grow something to be able to draw it. Otherwise, obviously, I'll be dead because I'll be bankrupt and whatever else. Usury is bad not just for individuals, but also for companies. Why is it bad for companies? Because using debt finance, borrowing money to grow my business, of course, on the one hand, I can grow my business faster than I would otherwise. But on the other hand, I'm forced to pay you interest for the use of that money when you're not taking any risk, or you're taking a very low level of risk for loaning me that money. As a businessman, it would be far better for me if you actually invested in my business. If you invested in my business, then this would help my business to grow, and you would have a vested interest in making sure that my business improved. And you would be far less willing to pull the rug out from under my feet if the business was not going so well. So you would have a long-term commitment, a long-term partnership in being an equity investor. And there's not the same long-term interest in having the sort of I'll loan you some money attitude, which is what banks and so on very often have, and indeed private equity investors have at the moment. You could of course ask the question, if it's so bad, how come people haven't spotted this? Well, actually people did spot it. People spotted it a very long time ago. And in every traditional society, usury was forbidden. It was forbidden in the Bible, it was forbidden in the Quran, it was forbidden in the Indian scriptures, it was forbidden among the Chinese, it was forbidden among the Japanese, it was forbidden in Greek society, in Roman society, among the Red Indians or Native Americans. Every traditional society forbade usury. And this is the basis of the whole international economic system today. Now, of course, you could say, well, if every traditional society forbade usury, how come it's become the basis of this global economy? Well, the answer is very simple. The story begins with the lifting of usury in the 11th century. And when usury was lifted, the ban on usury was lifted in the 11th century, then Europe started growing faster and faster. And Europe then became a kind of model for other societies around the globe. And following the Reformation, once the Reformation had happened, then of course European society took off, as it were. And people looking at European society said, hey, we want to take off too, because Europe became a very prosperous society. And other societies then started imitating this very prosperous society, particularly after the end of the 19th century, when there was absolutely no doubt that European and of course American society, which is a colony of Europe, began to clearly outstrip the rest of the world. And then, following the rise of Darwinism in the end of the 19th century and the widespread acceptance of Darwinism from the time of the Second World War onwards, all kinds of restrictions that were still in place began to be lifted. So up to the 1950s, there was no ban on usury, meaning you could charge interest on the use of money, but there was a kind of upper limit. And this upper limit was lifted in 1950 something in the UK, and lifted in the States, and lifted in Europe, and so on. So that today there is absolutely no limit on the amount of interest you can charge. And you can charge, depending on, of course, how badly off a person is and how desperate he or she is to get a loan, you can charge higher and higher rates of interest, whatever interest the market will bear. And this means, of course, that usury has now become not just allowed, not just tolerated at some minimal level, which is what it was between the 11th century and the 19th century. But today usury has become so completely established and is being responsible for speeding up the economy. And it's this speeding up of the economy which is eating up not just the environment at a faster and faster rate, but actually exacerbating differences between the rich and the poor.